Bit of a delay. So we're on part 2 of the applications of NLP series. The last time, a few of you were present the last time as well.
Yeah.
So last time we spoke about the basics of NLP in terms of how it was founded and what's the purpose largely of NLP. You would find a whole lot of purposes of NLP around, as we would have heard of NLP for sales, NLP for convincing people, NLP for healing, and all of that. However, just as a primer, NLP began as the attempt of John Grinder and this guy who founded NLP, Richard Bandler and John Grinder. Their attempt was simply to model excellence. So they were not really looking at applications in terms of trying to manipulate anyone or changing behavior, but purely looking at modeling excellence. So their studies in NLP, or what eventually came to be known as NLP, began simply by studying who they termed as geniuses. So it could be a genius in the field of art, it could be a genius musician, it could be a genius healer. So they modeled several people, including a lady called Virginia Satir, who is an excellent counselor and a relationship counselor largely. They modeled someone called Milton Erickson, and there's a whole lot of case studies based on Milton, because this was a guy who was a medical doctor, crippled by polio, and yet he managed to heal himself, and he would heal others simply by telling them stories. It wasn't any medical or chemical induced healing. There was no allopathy, no homeopathy, nothing involved. He would simply, people would walk up to his clinic, he would tell them stories, and they would walk out healed. So a large part of what we now know as NLP began with studying Milton and what is now termed as a Milton model, in terms of using language for the purpose of healing, language for the purpose of reprogramming people. The assumption there is that a lot of our conditioning happens through language, right? What people tell us, what we have grown up with in terms of beliefs, values, culture, and a lot of self-dialogue. So a lot of beliefs that we have about ourselves, saying I'm good at this and I'm not so good at that and I'm miserable at this. All of that language tends to create patterns in the brains, and if you're able to correct or shift that pattern while the person is in a receptive state, right, which means you're in a state of what is termed as unconscious rapport with the person you're trying to heal, then it is possible that the behavior shifts. So that's the premise of NLP, just to give you a gist of the previous talk. So in the previous talk, we also spoke about the techniques of pacing and then eventually leading, which can be used for us to learn various behaviors that we would like to model others from. So the simplest technique to pace, while there are many techniques for it, the simplest technique is simply observe the person and try and map the breath of the person. So if I want to pace with you, I would simply look at you for a while, and assuming you're conscious of the fact that I am pacing, I could directly look at you, simply try and match the pace of your breath, right? So when you inhale, I inhale, when you exhale, I exhale. And when I do that for a while, I'm able to manage my breath in a way that I don't end up being breathless because his pace is too high or too low, right? So I'm able to be in sync with his breath. Beyond that, pacing also extends to imitating a person's body language, right? The way he sits, the way he looks, the tone of voice, imitating the tone of voice. So you can pace a person in various ways, and then accordingly try and learn whatever the person is trying to learn. So pacing, of course, works best when the person is displaying a behavior that you would like to emulate. So let's say a painter is painting and you want to emulate those skills. It is best that you pace the person while the person is painting, not when the person is doing something random, because that's not what you would want to emulate. So pacing is largely used for the purpose of learning. Leading is another possibility that opens up with pacing. So if I'm pacing a person for a while, so let's say if I have a child that is extremely hyperactive or irritated and I'm trying to pace the child for a while, I would pace in terms of breath, in terms of perhaps even body language, the physical activity level. If the child is jumping around, maybe I'll try and match that energy level for a while. And then eventually start leading the person into a state that I would like the person to get into. Of course, the intention here is purely positive. So in this case, if I want to calm the child down and maybe make the child have a meal comfortably, then I would pace the child for maybe a few minutes, and then eventually when I shift my posture and my tone and my energy level, the child, because he or she is in unconscious rapport with me, would also tend to calm down and tone down and perhaps sit down at one place and have a meal, right? So you can lead a person with pacing as well. So those are basics of NLP. NLP works on the premise of what is termed as unconscious rapport, which means you're in sync with the body rhythms of another person that you're in the presence of. Purpose, as we said, is largely to model excellence. You can emulate behavior, skills, attitudes are a little more difficult, but possible to emulate that as well over a period of time. So that's the background. Today's agenda, we're looking at building on that, building on the idea of pacing and leading an unconscious rapport, into looking at the concept of what are termed as representational systems, or the other word for it is modalities. Now, how do we store our thoughts and memories? Where if I have to tell you, okay, think about your first day at college or first day at work, how does that thought come to your mind?
See, it might be associated with some words, it might be associated with some event, it might be associated with some person.
Yes, there are associations.
It stands out in my mind.
Yes.
And when I recall, if I'm in a position to recall that event or that person or that word, the whole panorama goes before my eyes.
Yeah, all the associations come live. So when I say first day of your job, way back, so do you see it? Do you think about it? Do you feel something? What happens to you? Do you hear some noises?
We hear the very word, the questions that were asked, how they were asked, what answers were given, how the person responded or reacted.
Okay.
So all these things cloud.
So there is a lot of auditory memory for you. You remember the actual words that were spoken.
Words, even the person faces, the way the expressions on their face.
Okay. So it's a mix of visual, auditory words. Okay. How about someone else?
Ambience in that. Because when the first day work, how is
So can you still feel that apprehension in your body when you think about that day?
I don't think so.
Okay. But you remember the apprehension?
Yes.
Okay.
I think apprehension goes away with time.
Of course. Yeah, you may not feel it with that kind of intensity, but yes, you remember the apprehension, not the, perhaps the visual or the sounds are not as strong for you as the feeling of apprehension is. Right? So all of us store memories in different ways. Of course, it's a mixture of things for all of us. So if you look at the components or elements of our memories, there are images. Sometimes we can see people, sometimes there are vivid colors. You remember the exact dress that somebody was wearing, the scenery behind, right? All of that. Sometimes there are sounds. As he said, you sometimes remember the exact words uttered in a particular situation. Sometimes you may forget the words, but you remember the tone of a person. It was harsh, or it was sharp, or it was very soothing. Right? Sometimes there are feelings, as you said. The uppermost memory is that of a feeling of apprehension, not so much the thoughts or images. Sometimes we remember things by smell. Right? If someone's cooking something nice in the kitchen and you suddenly go back to some other associated memory. Or sometimes the smell of a certain flower brings back certain memories. And sometimes, yes, taste as well. Right? If I, for example, say chocolate, a lot of us can actually taste the taste chocolate in our mouth. So all our sensory organs store memory for us, right? So when we say memory, it's not just in here somewhere, it's all over the place. So we can, so there is memory in touch, memory in taste, memory in smell, in sight, in terms of audio as well. So these modalities or these sensory organs and the way they store memory, that is known as representational system. Right? So every time we use or remember something, when we have to retrieve that memory, like I said, how do you remember the first day of your job? You retrieve it through words, through visuals, through feelings. So all of these modalities or representational systems come into play. And usually one modality tends to be stronger than the other. For example, in his case, the stronger modality happened to be kinesthetic. It was that feeling of apprehension. Right? In his case, there was a very strong auditory memory also. There was that modality of sound, which the words which were very clear, even the visuals were very vivid for him. So depending upon the situation and depending upon which sensory organ at that point in time took the maximum impact of that situation, the modality of that memory might change. Of course, we also sometimes have what is called a preferred representational system, in the sense that some of us may have more memories which are visual, for example. Some of us may have more memories that are auditory. Some may have more memories which are kinesthetic. And although it's not necessary that just because it's a preferred system, the others are weak or the others are equally active. It just so happens that at the point in time when the event occurred, that particular system happened to be stronger or had a stronger impact because of the nature of the event. So if you look at, we may have heard about types of learners. Sometimes people are classified as being more visual or more auditory or more kinesthetic. However, if you look at new code NLP, the modern adaptive, or let's say evolutions in NLP, people are no longer classified as being one or the other, because being visual does not mean you don't have an auditory sense, or being kinesthetic doesn't mean you can't smell. It's just that one particular system happens to be true at a particular point of time. So doesn't necessarily mean that one particular system is a preferred system. It may be preferred for that moment in time. Right? So it's not for a lifetime. So why would we use modalities, and what is the whole purpose of this talk?
It helps you to, in that field of understanding the person or the situation.
Yes, it does. Hugely helps to understand the person. It also helps us understand ourselves. So people feel better if they are addressed through the modality that happens to be strong for them at that point in time. Right? So how do we understand somebody else's modality?
When he gives it experience, okay, I seen that, and then I could not see how you could see it. In sharing, we come to know each person's strong point and weak point.
Yes.
And we also come to know where we are in that particular situation.
Yes. So if we are working with ourselves, the easy way to understand our modalities with respect to a particular event or situation or memory would be talk to yourself about that particular situation and pay attention to your language. And think about what seems to be more active. Are we talking more in terms of I can very clearly see that event happening in front of my eyes? Or is the memory coming back in terms of saying, I can completely hear the sound of the train running in the background? Or I remember the feeling of apprehension on the first day of my job. Right? So each of these situations seem to evoke a certain modality more than the other. So if I say I can feel the apprehension, somewhere the kinesthetic modality is stronger for that particular memory. It doesn't mean that all memories of my life have to be of that particular modality, but it's stronger for that particular event. If I talk in terms of, it was such a beautiful evening, I completely remember the colors of the sunset, obviously I'm going more visual in this particular case. Right? Or if I'm talking in terms of, when I think of my childhood, I can still hear the sound of trains behind my house. So again, there is an auditory thing evoked. Now, if I'm sharing a particular, if you're working with yourself and you want to work with that memory in terms of perhaps healing it or shifting it in a way, first, of course, understand your own modality. Similarly, understand other people's modality if you're trying to work with someone and influence them in terms of perhaps healing or making them feel better. Think about what is the language that is coming up. Now, NLP by nature works in terms of reprogramming a person through language. So, language plays a very important role. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's English language or not, any language is fine. Pay attention to the cues that we get. So, for example, if you present a person, let's say, with a report of some kind, and the person happens to say, yeah, it's good, then obviously the person happens to be coming from a visual modality at that point. Instead, if you present a report and the person says, yeah, the idea sounds all right, at that moment in time, the auditory modality is stronger for that person. Or if it feels good, it feels correct, this plan feels good, positive, then the person is more on the kinesthetic mode. Now, how do we use modalities is, one, if you're trying to have a good conversation with a person, and especially if you're trying to convince a person about something, don't clash with their modality. So let's say if I presented a report to my boss and he happens to tell me, yeah, it looks good, and I happen to respond to that saying, yes, I have a very good feeling about it, somewhere I'm not matching that person's representational system. He's talking visually and I'm going inward, I'm going kinesthetic and saying how I'm feeling about it. And somewhere, even if the person happens to agree with you, if you want to take the conversation further and maybe persuade the person, it's going to be a clash because that person is in the mode of seeing something and you're going inward and feeling something else, and that's not necessarily a great
different angle.
Yes, I mean, you're talking of the same thing, same subject, however that person happens to be active in a different sensory organ than the one that you're addressing, right? So if the person is talking in terms of, yeah, it looks good, I can see how it can work, right? Somewhere the person is looking ahead, he's in that visual mode, and if you drag him out of that mode and go auditory or go kinesthetic, it is an effort for that person to shift that mode, and he may or may not want to shift it. Especially if you happen to have a conflict with the person, if someone's angry with you and you're trying to calm the person down or trying to mitigate the conflict, if at that point, even if you slightly change the representation system, the person will completely disconnect because the conversation will be more like you will be saying, yes, I can see. If you're on the visual, you will see, yeah, yes, I can see your point, and the person might come back to you and say, I don't hear you, or I don't think you're listening, because somewhere that person is auditory and you're being visual or you're being kinesthetic, and somewhere the person feels misunderstood. Intention is not it. Somewhere you're clashing with the representational system. Now, if it happens to be a light conversation, yeah, it may not matter as much because people are not particularly looking at being completely understood. But if it's an intense conversation, if it's a business dialogue that involves a lot at stake, or if there's a relationship issue that you're working with, then it helps to really understand what that person's modality is at that point in time. Again, it is important that we don't assume a person's modality as being permanent. Yes, a person may have a preferred modality most of the time, but doesn't mean that the person is always there. So it is necessary that we're sensitive to a person's language at any given point in time and then accordingly work with it. So shift your language to dialogue better with the person. And it's very easy to shift that language. So when the person is talking in terms of, do you understand me, do you see my point, obviously the person is visual, and then if you say I hear you, doesn't work. Instead, if you say, yes, I can see how you're thinking about it, match the system and the dialogue becomes so much easier. So, how do we understand modalities is very simple. It's just this. It's look at the language that the person uses. Hear the language. What are the specific words, verbs that the person uses, and it should be you should be able to work with the person well in terms of syncing with the person well. So the first step in NLP, as we said, is build that unconscious rapport, which is through pacing the person, pacing the tone, the voice, the breath, the body language if possible. And to add on to that unconscious rapport, if you really want to make a deep sense of rapport, then also match the modality of the person. So this is like step 2 of establishing unconscious rapport, because if you're able to do both, pace and then match the modality, you're completely in sync with the other person, and then whatever message you want to get through is very easy to do if you're able to manage your tone properly, because you're in complete unconscious rapport. So both are equally important. Also, a few other tips or techniques to identify where the person is in terms of modality. Sometimes a person may not be completely forthright in terms of language, may not speak too much, but we can still understand where the internal dialogue is going. So we've got the left and the right side. The left side, any eye movement, because the eyes are directly synced with the brain, so eye movements are very telling in terms of the process of the person at that moment in time in a conversation. So most movements where the eyes tend to go towards the left side are where the brain happens to be constructing or imagining or visualizing thing. It's not really recalling something, but it's trying to project something into the future or imagine something. Whereas movements on the right side, when the eyes tend to look towards the right, then the brain is trying to recall something from memory. It's not trying to imagine, or it's not trying to make up an answer or make up an excuse, but it's really trying to remember. So we've got a few clues there. So typically when the eyes go left upward, right, left and up, and let's say for example you're in a situation where you're interviewing the person for a job, you've asked the person some kind of a question and the person takes a while, looks up. What do you think the person's doing? Left side. He's trying to make up something and therefore very possibly lying if you're especially asking for a... Yes. Yeah, and especially if your question at that point happens to be about a skill or an experience and he happens to look up, then he's obviously constructing something which is not real. Yes, it could mean manipulating, because the left side is where the brain has gone into the construction mode of creating something that does not actually exist. So depending upon the context of the conversation, if you've asked for something which is like an experience or a past record and the eyes go there, then very possibly the person is making up an answer and you might want to recheck the answer or validate it by asking a few other questions. If you're looking at the eyes going left but parallel, not up, just sideways, then that is construction, but then here you're talking of construction of sounds, which means there is an internal dialogue happening about, am I in the right place? Does this sound good to me? There is an evaluation happening of the current situation. There's an internal
Evaluation.
Yeah, internal evaluation. The person is not too sure of, am I okay here, am I comfortable here? So trying to evaluate what's happening in the process. Okay. If the eyes go left down, okay, then the person is in an introspective mode and very likely the person is checking for his or her own feelings. Am I feeling good about this particular situation? Are my emotions all right? Maybe I'm feeling angry, maybe I'm feeling very happy. Right? So left down is where the internal dialogue is about something's not okay with my emotion, I need to judge my emotion. Right? And when I say not okay, it's just that I'm at this moment in time, I'm not aware of what it is, and there is a need for me to understand my emotion. It could be a pleasant emotion, it could be that, yeah, I'm feeling very happy and I obviously can't show it in front of this person. But just that check, emotional check about there's some feeling that is happening and I need to know what that feeling is. Right? So the left side in general is constructed reality, it's not real reality. Right? Eye movement on the left side is where the brain is triggering neurons to remember things that have already happened. So now it's accessing memory when your eye movement's on the right side.
Right side.
Yeah. So if you ask somebody something and the person's eyes go right up, then obviously the person is recalling something that has actually happened. So when I said, for example, how was your first day on the job? Yeah, the eyes are likely to go right up because you're pulling something from memory. You're not reconstructing anything. Yeah, it's simple recollection. It's simple remembrance of something. Yeah.
Recollecting the facts.
Yes, recollecting facts or things that have already happened to you. You're not making up an experience. Eyes going sideways to the right. Again, it's a recall, but now it's recall of sounds. It's recall of words. So if you ask a person, do you remember exactly what this guy said to you that day? Then yes, the eyes are very likely to go sideways towards your ear. Because you're trying to recall exact words, exact sounds. It could be a certain kind of music that you're trying to recall. Right? Or it's a tune that you're trying to recall. Then the eyes go right sidewards. And right downward is where there is internal dialogue happening. Now this is rational dialogue. It's not an emotional dialogue like it was left down. Right down is where there is a very clear rational evaluation of the current situation. The person is perhaps trying to make a decision about something and the person seems to be in control of his or her feelings at that point in time. So it's a pure internal dialogue about what next, what needs to be done. So that's a very powerful cue, especially if you're having a one-to-one dialogue with somebody and it's a crucial dialogue for you. It really helps to know what the internal modalities are. A lot of times people may not directly speak to us, so it can get challenging to understand language modality. So then look at the eyes, and it's the advantage with this is you cannot manipulate the movement of your eyes. It's just so involuntary like the rest of your body language. Although yeah, the rest of the body language you can still probably train yourself, maybe train yourself to have a blank face or something, but eye movements are completely spontaneous. Yeah, completely spontaneous. It's not something that we can control unless you're trained to be an absolutely expert liar, which I don't think a regular person would try to do. So it's a very powerful cue. Especially if you're trying to persuade someone to do something, it really helps to know what space the person happens to be at. Okay. And of course, if the person happens to be looking straight ahead, then usually the person is trying to visualize something that could happen in the future. The person is open to possibilities. So if the eyes aren't going sideways but just straight ahead, then usually it indicates that the person is fairly optimistic at that point in time, or is open to ideas, open to opinions, open to possibilities. So that again can be accessed by us and capitalized on. So that's something that is extremely powerful in terms of observation. And of course, finally, why are we talking of modalities? About leading, and then we're kind of building up on that by using modalities. One, you can use it for learning. So if you're trying to model someone in terms of a skill, so let's say someone is a very good actor and you want to learn acting from that person, observe, pace with the person, of course. So if you're watching the video of a person, pace with the person in terms of breath, possibly body language, maybe match the tone and the energy level, and then see if you're able to add modalities to it. Now, if it's an actor and he or she's using dialogues from a movie, obviously the language is not as important because it's not his or her dialogue. But yes, it will help to understand the eye modalities to see how the person, what emotional state the person is in when the person's rendering that dialogue, and then it will help you model that person better. So any kind of a skill. So let's say someone's a great speaker and you're trying to model the person, or someone's a good cook and you're trying to cook like that person. Be with the person, pace, and then replicate the modalities as much as possible. While pacing helps us in terms of imitating the physical energy of the person, representational systems help us by imitating the emotional energy at that point in time, because they help us understand whether the person is thinking visually about something, or feeling something emotional, or tasting something, or where the eyes are going will tell us a lot. So it's a step ahead in terms of building unconscious rapport, because you're not only imitating the physical aspect but also the subtle emotional aspects of the person. So learning becomes much faster. The other thing, of course, that you can do is build rapport much more easily if you're able to do both pacing and modalities, because you're in sync with the person doesn't feel misunderstood because there is unconscious rapport. And very importantly, if you're using rep systems for yourself, it can help you tone down unpleasant memories if that's one usage that you would want about it. So let's say, for example, if I have a memory of an accident and I don't really want to remember that accident, so the first step for me would be to sit back, think about it, and have a dialogue with myself and see how am I speaking to myself about that accident. Am I speaking in terms of I can see that road and I can see the roadblock ahead and I can see how the bike turned, right? If it's very visual, then what I can do is get into a calm space and shift that dialogue and change that modality. So instead of talking in terms of see, I can shift it in terms of, I can hear the bike passing, or I could hear the sound of birds around, or whatever. Shift that modality and automatically the memory tones down, because the representational system that was strongest at that point in time gets reduced. And if you're able to sit in a calm space and repeat the incident to yourself, by shifting that modality, ensure that you don't go to the preferred modality of that memory. Shift that modality and repeat the memory. Eventually, after a point in time, the impact of the event goes down for you. So that's something that can be pretty easily used for yourself. Shift the modalities for yourself. Wherever you think you don't want to, it won't erase the memory, but it will certainly tone down the memory for you. Okay. So that's modalities. That's that for today. Thank you. Any questions on this?
This